Hey guys, it's Coach Nick here with the 10-0 Mindset, where my goal is to provide you with all of the knowledge, resources, and support that you need to approach gymnastics from a place of self-compassion, encouragement, and happiness. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the role that healthy thought patterns play in our gymnastics progress and performance. This is one of those things that I think everybody needs to understand and hold fresh in their mind. So let's get started. It's easy to understand that healthy thought patterns are better than unhealthy thought patterns, but a lot of times, we don't really know what exactly unhealthy thought patterns are. More often, we don't realize that we're having an unhealthy or unhelpful thought until it's already done its damage. To understand thought patterns, we're going to talk about what's called the cognitive model. The cognitive model was developed for a specific form of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. CBT is based upon the idea that how you think determines how you feel and how you behave. Now maybe that just makes sense to you, or maybe you're having a tough time understanding how your thoughts can actually change your behavior. But once you see it in action, you'll see how it all works. So let's go over an example. Imagine this. You're walking down the street, having a pretty good day, minding your own business, and a stranger gives you a dirty look. What's the first thing that you think? One possible thought that you could have is, ugh, I must have done something wrong. I'm so awkward. That thought, of course, makes you feel embarrassed and upset with yourself. Because you feel embarrassed and upset with yourself, you apologize to the stranger and replay the situation over and over and over again in your head, trying to understand what you did wrong. In this example, you might have noticed that the initial thought wasn't very rational. The stranger could have been making a face for any number of reasons. Maybe the stranger just broke up with their partner, or lost their job. Maybe the stranger just makes faces at everyone. Who knows, really? As human beings, we have irrational thoughts just like these all the time. Unfortunately, irrational or not, these thoughts still affect how we feel and how we behave. Think back to the example we just went over. Consider how you could have responded to the same situation if you'd had a different thought. Let's say the stranger looked at you funny, and your first thought was, "What a jerk." What emotion would you feel then, as a result of that thought? Instead of feeling embarrassed like before, you'd probably feel angry, and because you're feeling angry, you shout back at the stranger, "Hey, what's your problem?" Suddenly, because of that first thought, you might find yourself in some type of confrontation or altercation right there on the side of the road. Alright, let's do one more. The stranger looks at you funny, and your first thought is, "Hey, maybe he's having a bad day." This thought doesn't really make you feel much at all, and instead, you feel kinda neutral. Because of that neutral emotion, what do? You walk away, and in a matter of minutes, you forget that the whole incident ever happened. Using the cognitive model, you can learn to identify your own patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. You'll come to understand how your thoughts shape how you feel, and how they impact your life in a significant way. Once you become aware of your own irrational thoughts, you can learn to change them. The thoughts that once led to anxiety, fear, or anger will be replaced by new, healthy alternatives. Finally, you'll be in control of how you feel. So before we go replacing irrational thoughts with healthy ones, we have a couple of things we have to learn first. We have to learn how to become aware of our thoughts, what thoughts are irrational thoughts, and how to replace those irrational thoughts with healthy ones. When it comes to becoming aware of your thoughts, the first step that you can take is a nice easy one. So for 5 minutes a day, try to keep a thought log. Write down all the thoughts that you have, and whether you think they're irrational thoughts or healthy thoughts. At this stage, we're not looking to judge our thoughts, just to simply observe them as they occur. With a little bit of practice, you'll be able to notice your thoughts as you go about your day in work, school, or gymnastics practice. Once we're pretty good at recognizing the thoughts that we're having, we have to determine if those thoughts are healthy or if they're irrational. It's important to note that although all thoughts have an impact on you, they aren't necessarily all true. Oftentimes, you'll find yourself thinking thoughts that don't actually represent reality, but instead they paint a much darker picture that isn't true. So we've got a good handle on observing our thoughts, but how do we know which ones are irrational? Again, it takes a little bit of practice, but there are some very common irrational thought patterns that all of us experience, and we call them cognitive distortions, because they portray a distorted sense of reality and not what's actually going on in our lives. Let's talk about a few of the most common cognitive distortions. The first and probably most common distortion is magnification and minimization. This is when we either exaggerate or minimize the importance of events. For instance, you might believe that your own achievements are insignificant or unimportant, or that your mistakes are excessively important. Another way this distortion manifests itself is through what's called catastrophizing, which is when we only see the worst possible outcome of a situation. It's important for us to be honest and kind with ourselves. Our achievements usually do matter, and our mistakes usually don't matter. And although we might only be seeing the worst possible outcome of a scenario, there's likely a ton of other possible outcomes that aren't as unfortunate. Another common cognitive distortion is overgeneralization. Overgeneralizing is when we make broad interpretations from a single event or a few events. For example, we have one tough day on beam, or we fail one biology test, and we make the interpretation, "Ugh, I'm terrible at beam," or "I'm so bad at biology." A more realistic interpretation would be, "I had a tough day on beam today," or "I didn't do so well on that one biology test." A third really common unhealthy thought pattern is what we call fortune telling. As you might expect, fortune telling is when we expect a situation to turn out badly without having any real evidence that it actually will. Although situations can possibly go badly, there's the equal possibility that it'll go well, and often we don't recognize that. Situations are just as likely to go well as they are to go bad. We're going to go over just two more. The next one is called emotional reasoning. It's okay to be an emotional person. I'm a super emotional person, but emotions can be deceiving. Although all of your emotions are valid, much like thoughts, they don't always reflect the way that things actually are. For example, I don't always feel like a great gymnastics coach. There are days where I go home and feel like I didn't do anything right. I say something to myself like, "Ugh, I feel like an awful coach." I then have to be careful to remind myself that although I feel like an awful coach, that doesn't mean that I am an awful coach. The final cognitive distortion that we're going to go over today is what's called disqualifying the positive. I see this one a ton of times when I'm coaching gymnastics. Disqualifying the positive is when we only recognize the negative aspects while ignoring any positives. For example, let's say you're receiving an evaluation. You may receive many compliments on the evaluation, but you only focus on the single piece of negative feedback. Again, it's important to remember that these types of automatic negative thoughts are a part of life, and that most everyone experiences them, myself included. The goal is to try to become aware of them as they occur. That way we can replace them with healthy thoughts. So how do we replace them? The key is self-compassion. Self-compassion means that we have to extend the same kindness and love to ourselves that we would extend to a loved one or a small child. Once you realize that you're having an unhealthy, untrue, or unhelpful thought, stop and think to yourself, what's a more accurate or helpful thought? Let's say you find yourself guilty of disqualifying the positive. You got that evaluation, and you're beating yourself up over that one negative point when there were many positives. The automatic negative thought that you have is something like, "Wow, Coach Nick said I need to work on my flexibility. I have terrible splits. I'm never going to be a good gymnast if I can't even do a split." You stop and realize this thought isn't really rational. So what's a healthier thought? What's a thought that more accurately depicts reality? Well, it might be, "Hey, Coach Nick said that I need to work on flexibility, but I've made a lot of progress in my strength and technical skills. That's great, and improving my flexibility will help take my gymnastics to the next level." This thought is both more true and is more kind to ourselves. I have a simple approach when it comes to having more self-compassionate thoughts. Think about whether the thought that you're having is something that you would say to a teammate in a similar situation. If you're tumbling on floor and you fall on a tumbling pass, you tell yourself, I should just give up. I should quit gymnastics. Would you say that to a teammate who fell on floor? Hopefully, the answer is no. And if it's not something you would say to a teammate, it's not a helpful thing to say to yourself either. Just a quick recap, the cognitive model explains how our thoughts affect our feelings and behaviors. Some types of situations happen, and we have a thought about it. That thought makes us feel an emotion, and that emotion in turn determines how we respond to the situation. I'm going to leave you with a short quote. Michael Jordan once said, I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. Remember that making mistakes is an important and healthy part of the learning process, and that you need to make mistakes to learn. I hope this has been helpful, and that you're able to start working on replacing your automatic negative thoughts with helpful and healthy ones. You'll start to notice that by being more compassionate toward yourself, you're able to accept mistakes with grace, and that you're more willing to try things that you could potentially fail on. You're already making a huge step forward by listening to this episode, and you should be so proud of yourself.